Well, Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome back to the Bank Customer Experience Podcast. This is our first podcast of the new year, and we are joined by the friends of the podcast, Cook Solutions Group. We are joined today by Michael Strange, who's the Director of Technology Services at Cook Solutions Group, and Alissa Luecke, who is the Fintech Solutions Consultant at Cook Solutions Group. Great to have you two on.
Thank you.
Perfect. So for the topic today, we want to focus, since it's a new year, we want to focus on new fraud trends, both in banking and with ATMs, kind of what's going on in that space, what can we expect to see, and what are some ways we can be proactive in preventing it. So to kick it off, with it being a new year with new fraud, what are you seeing in terms of ATM or ITM attacks and types of fraud across the US?
Jackpotting and skimming still continue to be the two top types of fraud that we're seeing. Jackpotting really standing out. In the last 8 to 10 months, that's been the primary concern. We're seeing dozens of attacks a month, and it's really spread out across the country, East Coast back to the West Coast. So just a ton of activity with the jackpotting, both successful and unsuccessful, and really just targeting all types of institutions, large, small, just really the breakout type of fraud that we're seeing consistently across the United States.
Interesting. Is there any specific reasons they're being hit more than others?
Yeah, a little bit of it is complacency. The United States hasn't really been the main target for a lot of these types of logical attacks on ATMs. We typically see that in Europe and South America, and there was just a lot of institutions caught out of pocket, mainly around hard drive encryption, and that's really the exploit that they've been picking on in the last 8 to 10 months, attacking the hard drive directly. I believe we spoke about that the last time I was on. And they've really just been consistent. The last 8 to 10 months, that is all they've been doing, is attacking the hard drives. We're starting to see some new vectors come into play, but the primary focus for them has been just finding unencrypted hard drives and then using a decades-old exploit or variants of that exploit called Plotus to jackpot the machines. But really using that hard drive as the entry point to get that done.
Right. I think that's very interesting, just because there was some questions about whether that method was still effective, and we've seen it make a comeback in a big way in the United States. So with that in mind, so Michael and Alissa, you two both are known to meet regularly with the U.S. Secret Service. How do you help each other prevent ATM fraud across the U.S.?
Yeah, Brad, the relationship with Secret Service, it's still fairly new, but it's very unique in the way that I'll frequently get text messages and random phone calls from FBI or Secret Service on my personal cell, which is crazy, gives me a little heart attack every time. But they're, warning us, saying, hey, we're seeing this in the United States, or this is starting to kick up a little bit. And I mean, jackpotting, like Michael said, it's rampant in the United States, and jackpotting is the leading form of ATM fraud, at least according to NCR. NCR had released that recently. So we report things on behalf of financial institutions and just kind of be proactive about it, even if they don't have a case open with their local PD. We report it for them, just so that way we get that information out there to the authorities, so that way they can at least be aware and link it to other cases.
It's been a problem in the past getting law enforcement buy-in for these types of fraud. Less so with jackpotting because there's actual monetary theft from the ATM, but typically the smaller law enforcement agencies aren't as interested in these types of crimes. They don't have the resources to pursue them. So having that tight buy-in from federal law enforcement, Secret Service really being the one to map out the fraud, is keeping track of the crews that are moving across the United States, being interested in the crime and wanting to track it. We recently had notification come through of an arrest on the East Coast that was a gentleman that had perpetrated multiple skimmer attacks on the West Coast back in 2023. And was scooped up again on the East Coast. Was his 4th or 5th arrest in 2 years for these types of crime, but finally ran afoul of federal law enforcement and was scooped up, hopefully for the last time in the U.S. So it's nice to see that partnership and that interest from law enforcement.
The other thing I would say is on that, the Local law enforcement doesn't necessarily have that buy-in until we say, hey, we're reporting this to Secret Service. And then sometimes they're like, oh, so it's at the federal level. I'll go out there and get some fingerprints. So sometimes that just gives that little extra oomph to go and get like a full investigation done.
Right. That makes perfect sense because a lot of times they're not going to have the resources or the power to be able to look into all these individual cases, especially when it's a very complex case where there's a lot of moving parts. So, let's talk a little bit about teller cash recycles and video surveillance equipment. Do you see any types of fraud or attacks to either of these?
TCRs are a little bit unique from ATMs in that they're inside the branch, usually directly under a teller's control. So, from our involvement in that hardware space, we don't see a ton of fraud around those machines. A little bit harder to get away with when the ATMs are a lot more vulnerable, especially with these jackpot attacks. It's typically the standalone island machine that's just out in the middle of a parking lot at 2 a.m. Very, very vulnerable situation to be in. But with video surveillance equipment, it's no secret that everyone, I've got surveillance equipment on my home, so of course a bank is going to have it. So these bad actors are fully aware that surveillance exists, and they try to take countermeasures to get around these things, covering their faces, wearing hoods, that sort of thing. But in the larger attacks, we have seen multiple instances where bad actors will attempt to disable surveillance, like take some additional measures. Most recent example was a tunneling attack into a credit union. So they broke in through the wall of an adjoining space, came into the data closet of the bank, and the very first thing they did was rip out the surveillance server from the network rack and then rip the alarm system off the wall. They'd also deployed cell jammers. So with those two actions, they had completely negated the surveillance coverage for that particular institution. And we got involved after the fact, and that's where some of these things where we've been lucky in the United States and don't have to think about this too often, but there wasn't video surveillance in the data closet. So they didn't get any of that attack. They only had cameras in the sensitive spaces. They didn't have alarm communication loss monitoring in place for their alarm monitoring. They didn't have any standalone, what we call edge recording cameras deployed. So we at CSG, we offer a camera that records on the edge. So the camera is a standalone server. You rip the server out of the server rack, this camera is going to continue to record, going to continue to broadcast. Each camera is its own standalone unit. So using server mounted and edge mounted cameras, you get that kind of redundant coverage, right? And then making sure that they have a redundant power supply. So those types of things in the surveillance space, stuff that we typically don't have to worry about, is definitely becoming more prevalent as these more sophisticated organized crime kind of attacks seem to be expanding.
Right. That's a really great point. So when we're looking at banks and credit unions. So obviously a lot of this stuff is reactive. Like a crime happens, they try to figure out, okay, who was involved. But a lot of times they're disguised, it can be kind of difficult to track them down. A lot of times they're part of criminal groups that move around very quickly all throughout the United States. So it can be very difficult to do after the fact. But what are some best practices financial institutions can be thinking about to prevent the attacks in the first place?
Yeah, great question. And a lot of it is the layered approach. There is no silver bullet. There's no one thing that you can do that's going to protect you from all crime. And you've really got to get as many complementing layers as you can. And the part that gets missed quite often in that conversation is the toys and the gadgets aren't enough. You have to have an internal procedure to support those gadgets. And the best example of this is the top hat on an ATM, which is the unsecured portion of the machine, right? Not where the cash is stored, but where the computer equipment is. So a lot of institutions have an alarm on that. And when the top hat is open, an alarm is triggered. But then nobody put a procedure in place on what to do if the top hat is open. So the alarm goes off. The workflow is the bad guys close the top hat immediately and leave. It's a probing attack, right? It's reconnaissance. So the bank gets the alarm call, pulls up their surveillance camera. There's nobody there. The top hat's closed. Hey, it was a false alarm. The next call that comes in, oh yeah, false alarm again. Go ahead and disregard for the rest of the day. And now you're getting jackpotted because you didn't have a procedure to support that top hat alarm. The appropriate response would be the top hat alarm went off. I need to look at the video footage at the time of the alarm. I have to hit that rewind button and look, did somebody actually open my top hat? And if they did, be aware that that's the probing attack. Okay, they opened the top hat, they're coming back later. Let's go disable the machine or remove cache, right? Having a procedure in place on how to react when the gadget goes bang. So not just putting the layers in place, but having the procedure institutionally to support those devices, but then also making sure that you're taking advantage of current technology, right? The object detection, where you can observe that a human being is in front of your machine, not just motion, and maybe pairing that with something like a strobe or a siren, something that can go off of humans in front of the machine. Hey, you're being recorded. Your top hat opens. Hey, we're calling law enforcement. Those are, active deterrents that can get somebody to leave. Making noise when somebody's potentially doing something bad to one of your machines, and then having something to support. Alarm is a big part of a lot of the security. Having something like video verification. We offer a service called Pico Verify, where when your alarm goes off, the call comes to my team and I review the video for you and I confirm if something nefarious has happened, instead of waking up an innocent branch manager at 1 o'clock in the morning that might not make the right decision because they were asleep 10 seconds ago. Getting a team that's awake and ready to react and familiar with this type of fraud. So taking advantage of the different technologies and services that are available, layering it to get you as much protection as you can, across your risk space, and then having that internal procedure to help you react when one of these devices sets off an alarm, and not just expecting the device to be the beginning and the end of the conversation.
Absolutely. All great points, Michael, especially about that, having those procedures in place, because it's worthless if it's just there just to kind of deter them, but then there's nothing, there's no follow up. So, Alissa, Cook Solutions Group has kind of talked in the past on this podcast about check fraud, but I want to
Mhm.
talk to you specifically. What do you see as some deterrents to check fraud at the ATM?
Yeah, check fraud is definitely on the rise still. People think that checks are going away, but check fraud just continues to go up. I think in the last survey I looked at, it went up 10% from the last year, which was kind of crazy to see just from what I hear. With, payee forgeries, check washing, endorsement fraud still being the main forms of check fraud out there. I'd say one of the most effective ways to combat or deter check fraud is going to be having a highly available, even cloud-based check processing solution like Conveyance. With Conveyance, it's got super flexible rules engines, flexible workflows, everything streamlined into one spot, and it just makes it way easier to catch those items before they're actually sent out to the Fed, and you can take that action immediately. We do have some exciting extra enhancements specifically around check fraud coming this year. So I'm really excited about that. We should have announcements going out, in the next couple of weeks or something like that. So we're pretty excited about that.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the more unusual styles of attacks or fraud, because we're all used to, obviously these check frauds and these jackpotting incidents or groups working together to physically pull the machine out from the wall and steal it. But what is the craziest attack or type of fraud you've both seen in 2025? And what do you expect to see in 2026?
Yeah, we
We've had some
we
good
do.
ones.
Yeah, we do a lot of video surveillance, so we quite often get to see firsthand when some of these attacks are taking place. And the craziest one I've seen is just, it still exists, the construction vehicle attack, where you steal a vehicle from a nearby construction place. And the one that we saw, they drove a front loader through the front of a bank branch, completely into the bank, and then used the front loader to pull the ATMs out of the bank, and then dragged them from behind a car attached to a chain down the road as police chased them away. That site was covered by Pico Verify, so we were able to get law enforcement on site while they were still performing the attack. And then eventually they dropped the ATM that they were dragging behind their car in the middle of the road, and police were able to bring it back.
Did
But
police just drag it back as well?
yeah, they too just tied it to a tied it to a chain and brought it back to the branch.
Yeah, that's
but
funny.
the old brute force, you can put all these gadgets on, and then I can still just drive a bulldozer through the wall and drive away with your ATM. That does still exist. And then just a couple of weeks ago, we had a jackpot attack take place, and one of our monitors for these types of attacks went off, and while we were investigating, the bad actors came back while we were actively observing the machine. And for a brief period of time, one of our people was actively interfering with the jackpotting attempt of the other person, which for a room full of nerds was a very exciting event. He got a lot of pats on the back that they weren't able to get around some of the things that he was doing. So so just actively getting to be involved in the prevention of some of these crimes is a thrill for us here in the nerdery. So that was pretty fun.
I think the craziest one I saw was, I would have to say, was when I was reviewing footage for one of the jackpotting incidents to grab screenshots and all that to send to Secret Service. And in the footage review, I was actually able to see the guy who was cutting the PC core open to get access to that hard drive. He actually cut himself on the sheet metal and started bleeding all over the machine, which I was sitting there, I was like, oh, did you actually just cut yourself? And we had called local PD and was like, hey, by the way, he bled all over it. You want to get that DNA? So that way we can, have that link to it and link him to other cases. But that was crazy. Yeah, he bled all over that machine. And I was like, well, it'll be easier to catch now.
Evidence. Yeah.
That's fair.
Yes. Made me feel really important when I was like, he touched here. There's blood here. Get everything.
CSI Portland.
Yeah.
Probably easily got an infection from that too.
Right.
Probably.
And then in 2026, the big thing that we're seeing, this really just starting to take place in the United States, is jackpotting, similar to what we've been seeing, but instead of attacking the hard drive, they're going in through the PCIe bus, which is a peripheral port on the motherboard inside the PC core. So a very similar attack, right? The attack that caches out the machine is still jackpot. It's still using something like a PLOTUS variant to send commands directly to the dispenser to make it dispense cash. But they're coming in through a different vector. So instead of attacking the hard drive, which a lot of people are encrypting now, which negates that attack vector, you go in through an unsecured PCIe port. So a very similar attack, just coming in through a different vector. And it does give them a little bit more access to a live running machine. You don't have to take things out of service and take the hard drive offsite and do things to it. You can attack the machine very quickly while it's on and in service, so it decreases the turnaround time. You don't have to have all the back and forth that you have with the jackpot attacks. So we've had several confirmed attacks in the United States of this PCIe variant. So we are expecting to see, we've said it before, it's an arms race. The bad actors find a way into the machine. We find a way to mitigate it. Then they find either a way around the mitigation or a different window that's left open, and come at it that way. A lot of the service companies out there like CSG, we've taken steps to block those PCIe ports to shut that avenue down. But just like with the hard drive attacks, a lot of institutions aren't used to having to pay attention to the logical security on an ATM. And so there's a lot of vulnerability there. And the layered approach, an alarm on your top hat, any kind of PC core or man-in-the-middle attack where you have to access the computer to facilitate the attack, your alarm top hat's going to be that first line of defense. Your surveillance system is going to capture those people hanging out in front of your machine and not doing a transaction. So something like our suspicious activity notification can help with those things, right? They're targeted at other types of attacks, but that layered approach can help you in other areas. So again, being efficient with the money that you spend and picking and choosing the layers that you're going to use to protect your space. You want that overlap. So even if they come back and do a completely novel attack like these PCIe attacks, my top hat alarm, my surveillance, my object detection, still going to pick you up, still going to be able to defend against those attacks, while we also work to patch these new vulnerabilities or these new avenues of attack.
Perfect. Well, that gave us a lot of great information. Is there anything either of you would like to highlight before we sign off for today?
I think just looking at those standalone machines for what they are, a box full of cash in a parking lot unattended, it is a very appealing target to the bad actors. And I think they've made it clear that they're not just going to go away. They're going to keep coming back. They're going to keep probing for gaps in the weakness or gaps in your defenses. And when they find one, they're going to flood it. They're not just going to go after one or two. It'll be a nationwide, month over month attack, as they just travel from town to town to exploit these vulnerabilities. So just realizing that we're on that organized crime radar, and they've realized that there's some vulnerability here that can be lucrative, and it's not going to be a one and done type situation. And just because they weren't successful on Tuesday doesn't mean they won't come back on Thursday and try again at a different machine or even at the same machine. And we've seen that happen multiple times in the field. So just to realize that we're on the attack vector now, and organized crime is trying to take advantage.
The only thing I would add would be we can't forget about the older types of attacks too. I know jackpotting, has been the main focus of the conversation here today, but we can't forget about skimming or, cash out attacks or man in the middle, all those other variants, because they are still active threats, and that layered approach, you have to take those other, forms of fraud into consideration when analyzing your fleet.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Michael and Alissa. Loved having you on.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.